Welcome guys to another Stronghold training quick learn series where we try to give you some very valuable, helpful, and transformational information that you can implement right away, and we try to do that as fast as possible. That's why it's called a quick learn. So because it's a quick learn, let's dive right in. So today we are talking about strategic problem solving. Another way of looking at this is high-level decision making. It's not necessarily something that on the surface looks like a very attractive subject, but if there's one thing I've learned after being a consultant for a while is that critical thinking is not at an all-time high at all. It's definitely something we struggle with, and part of the reason has nothing to do with our lack of intellect, but it actually has a lot to do with our amount of overwhelm. So because we're overwhelmed and making so many small decisions all day long, like sending emails and answering calls and on chats all day long, we actually don't even have time to critically think. So we've gotten away from critical thinking and strategic problem solving for so long now that we actually got to come back at a bit of a remedial level and look at the fundamentals of it. And what that allows us to do is kind of frame up how to make these decisions going forward. It kind of puts us back into the mindset we needed to be at. And it kind of gives us tools once again that we can begin doing this. And some of this you're gonna go, you know what, I remember when I used to operate that way, or I used to work in a company or in an organization that actually did things like that. And I didn't realize that's why we were so effective, is that we were actually employing these techniques. I just thought they were really smart people. But there is actually a process to this. There is a systematic way of strategically solving problems. So we're just going to dive into what that looks like. So if I was to boil it down into just 3 steps of how we strategically solve problems, these would be the 3 steps. First would be understanding, then critical thinking, and then implementation. And understanding and critical thinking may sound like they're the same, and these all have bleed over, but I want to unpack each of these steps: understanding, critical thinking, and implementation. So step 1, understanding. It's foundational. That's why it's the first step. But when I say foundational, I mean it's going to actually determine the extent of the success of the other steps. I've worked with some tremendous critical thinkers and some tremendous implementers over the years, but they could only go as far as their initial understanding got them. Great problem solving really begins with great questions. A lot of times we have great solutions, but we fail to apply them because we just didn't get enough understanding early on. This is foundational to coaching, to leadership, to sales. Really, strategic problem solving is sales done right. It is coaching and leadership done right. So it's not just how we solve problems, it's actually how we help other people solve problems. And we do that by asking great questions. Why we skip this step is because we don't think we need to ask ourselves questions. We figure we already have the answers to our questions. It would sound funny to ask ourselves questions, but we actually do need to. And these are the types of questions we would ask. Obviously, we would ask open-ended questions, why questions, tell me about questions, tell the story type questions. We would ask close-ended questions, yes or no, true or false type questions, and then options questions. And those kind of go without saying. You understand those already. You probably understand those are the 3 categories of questions: open-ended, closed-ended, and options. But now to apply that in strategic problem solving, especially step 1, understanding, means you're actually stepping back from the problem and asking these questions of the problem. We have to have an inquisitive mindset. And what that means is that we are actually unbiased. Now, we can never totally be unbiased, but the idea here is that we are we are trying to leave our biases at the door during the understanding step and coming and just asking everything we can. It's called the inductive method of asking questions. We try not to bring presuppositions or biases to what we're trying to understand, and instead we try to gain everything out of the situation as if we knew nothing. When I first became a consultant, I was intimidated. I thought, every time, especially I went to a new industry, I thought, man, what do I really have to bring them in this industry? I've never worked in this industry before. And what I found was that that was actually what was so empowering to me, is that I wasn't bringing biases. I could come in and learn and ask great questions, and then their solution became very clear, usually to them before it became clear to me, because now that the right questions were asked in an inductive way, they did have the experience to bring the solution. And over time, I gained that too. But that can actually begin working against us. As we become better experts, we sometimes forget the inductive method. We bring our expertise to bear on every situation without first seeking to understand as if we knew nothing at all. That's the key. Seek to understand from a place of, I don't know, let me find out, which requires a lot of patience, because as we ask questions, especially good questions, we'll instantly think of great solutions, and we actually need to slow down and keep asking. So let's look a little bit at the critical thinking part. So if we're coming to a problem, we're asking great questions of it, now we can begin critically thinking as we gain understanding. So I want you to picture there's a problem, a dilemma before you. You're a manager at an organization, a leader of some sort, and there's a dilemma here. You've got to make a big decision. You've got to solve some sort of problem. The first thing you need to do is step back from that problem, begin asking questions of that problem. How did we get here? Where could we potentially end up? What are the options I have in front of me? Why are we here? And instead of trying to figure that out from your expertise, you're going to ask questions and really flesh it all out. Now, the reason we don't actually like to do that is, again, we think we already know how we got there. But this process actually triggers our brain to start working at a level it doesn't normally work at. It goes deeper into the muscle of our brain, and it pulls out a lot of better analysis, and it actually causes us to solve things better. As we ask those questions, we can begin using the critical thinking process, which takes time. These aren't shooting from the hip solutions. And one of the best ways to go about this is to actually not keep everything in our head churning around, because that takes bandwidth of our thinking power. So as we're asking questions and beginning to critically think, we really want to take some notes or use a whiteboard. And it's better to not do this alone. If you can have more than one processor, more than one brain working, it goes better. Collaboration is amazing. Sometimes, at least as a muse, sometimes people are inspirational as just being available to almost from a competitive way. Sometimes having other people in the room just cause us to ask better questions. Also, we need to be able to ask questions of the data, which means we need to have data present. Critical thinking means not just thoughts, feelings, and opinions and expertise. It actually means collecting of data. So when we go back to that understanding, step one, part of our understanding is getting data and not assuming anything. So now we're going to ask questions of the data itself. And we want to begin laying out various conclusions. So part of the critical thinking process is actually not just trying to get to one solution. It's a mistake I see made all the time, trying to get to just one solution instead of what we need to do, which is laying out several possible variables, even sometimes unlikely variables, so that we can begin putting this together in more logical order. The best way to do that is through intense visualization. So when I say visualization, I want you to actually use the logic process that we used to learn in school many moons ago. They don't teach anymore, but we actually want to bring logic to bear. Our brains think best when they think logically, and the best way to do that is to begin categorization. So again, we go back to that whiteboard, we begin asking questions of whatever it is we're trying to solve. As we ask questions, those answers get written down on the whiteboard, and those things can be categorized, such as these are the why answers, or these are things that correlate to revenue, these are things that correlate to service, these are things that correlate to our core values. Those are ways to categorize what we're doing, putting them up on a whiteboard so they're visual. We can also prioritize. So as we ask questions of the data and we start getting answers, we can start saying, number one, this is most important. Number two, this is secondary. And I find that this is one area of visualization and logical function and critical thinking that teams do. Prioritization is oftentimes used. But that's because we have such a tremendous sense of urgency, not necessarily because we're being logical, but because we're trying to knock stuff out as quick as possible. And remember, this is a patient process. It's trying to avoid rework and mistakes. So categorization and prioritization should go together, not just prioritization alone. Another way to do this is mind mapping. It's basically a way to say, okay, if I'm here and I'm at A, I'm trying to get to Z, and we begin kind of plotting everything on the board of different ways we can go, or you write a word on the board, you ask questions of it, you draw lines away from that word, and you start putting other words around there. There's lots of different ways to mind map. Marketers are really good at it. But basically, while asking questions, you begin to almost put a design of your answers up on the board. I would say Google mind mapping and watch another entire tutorial on that. It's very good. I'm a big fan of this one more than mind mapping, usually in corporate settings, which is linear timelines. Again, I'm at A, I'm trying to get to Z. What are the steps that I know I have in between here? And you kind of begin putting them in a linear or step-by-step fashion. Sometimes we overthink this. We jump right in, we go, this is step one, what does step two need to be? And that's actually a difficult way to do that. So better form of visualization is, here's step one, here's step 10, what's step 5? If you can throw that up there, go ahead and throw that up there. That frees you up to then look at what's between 1 and 5. And it's a great logical way to break it down. It's amazing to me how teams get overwhelmed because they fail in the ability to visualize timelines. And they just kind of zigzag all over the place. Where a simple strategic problem solving session where you have a critical thinking board and you draw these timelines would end that. Swim lanes are very similar. It's just kind of putting all of your processes together where you can see where they interconnect. So Six Sigma is known for doing this. So, okay, we've got process A, B, C, D, E. They all are going from step 1 or A to Z in each of their own linear timelines, and they connect at certain points. You can actually put all those processes up on a board and begin. There's actually programs that do this, or you can begin putting what are called swim lanes together or logical flow diagrams. An excellent way to get a grasp of complex scenarios, which is typically what we find when we need strategic problem solving. Analogies and illustrations help too. Illustrations can break down, but it sometimes helps to step back and say, how can I liken this to farming? How can I liken this to other types of illustrations? And the reason why is there are typically timeless principles that apply in every situation. And sometimes an illustration is a great way to help free your mind up and get you out of the weeds, kind of looking outside the problem, seeing the forest through the trees. To use an illustration, it can be very, very helpful. And one thing that we often forego in the modern day is we don't learn from history. We never want to go and look at what was done in the past because the past was different. But if we actually try to find principles from the past, we can apply them today. So doing some research in your understanding phase as to similar situations that happened before works really well. I do a lot of work in emotional intelligence, and there are some things we've learned from case studies in the 1800s that have really helped formulate how we think of emotional intelligence today. And simply by going through old newspaper articles and finding some different things, we've come up with some great case studies and medical studies that have helped tremendously in emotional intelligence. It's amazing what people before us have done. And that's a reason to seek advice as well, because everybody has a history, everybody has some expertise. And it doesn't have to directly apply. So if you're working in an organization and you're trying to solve a complex problem, you can call up an advisor and just say, hey, I'm trying to solve this problem. Maybe you've never worked around this before, but have you ever done anything like this? And just kind of give them a general overview of what's going on. And a lot of times they can't tell you exactly what your solution is, but they can tell you some sort of experience they had before and what they did, and it kind of triggers that thing in your brain that you needed to now begin thinking more critically. This is exactly what CEO roundtables are for. got a bunch of CEOs sitting around a table from different industries, but as they talk about principles and approaches and different methods of thinking and experiences, it kind of unlocks our ability to solve our own complex issues. And then the Latin word there, tolle lege, we've got to pick up and read. We're just not a reading society anymore, where everyone wants to listen to a podcast with 3 easy steps, and I appreciate that. But it's really deeper reading that causes us to critically think more. We used to go to our libraries to solve issues, and maybe your problems aren't in your solutions aren't in those books, but the critical thinking process of hunting in books oftentimes brings great solutions. And we have to be humble. So understanding where we're weak tells us who we should be seeking advice from. We live in a society that wants to challenge everybody. Challenging is great, but sometimes the best thing you can do is realize that I just need some help here, instead of I need to be challenged, and go get the experts that can really help you. So then our third step after critical thinking is to implement. It's not enough in strategic problem solving to simply solve our problems. Believe it or not, we actually have to get out there and make the solution a reality. So again, the right conclusions are critical, but your ability to execute is just as critical. You can know how to farm, have all the right seeds, tools, and conditions, but can you actually farm? I can probably give nutrition and workout advice with the best of them, but can I actually lift? Can I actually have the discipline to implement that diet? That's where the rubber really meets the road. So strategic problem solving isn't just being really smart, but it's actually being very capable. Capabilities are more important. And one of the ways that we make sure this happens, implementation is not about just getting to work. I've left many meetings where we were just starting to get to the good critical thinking, and suddenly we're delegating and sending people running around doing a bunch of stuff. We're not methodical. We don't take our time to visualize the whole thing through and plan our steps. But that's actually not where a lot of us fail. Even though we do jump in too fast, don't get me wrong, one of the biggest areas we fail is we may get an initial plan perfect, but we don't regularly review progress. I go to many sales meetings where the sales team has a quarterly plan, and then they don't meet again until the next quarter. I work with many people I coach that will come up with an exercise plan, but they don't look again at their calendar or track the weight they're lifting. You've got to regularly review progress. It's key to implementation because that's where all your tracking and tweaking is done. Critical thinking, strategic problem solving involves not thinking you have all the answers right away. You've got to tweak as you go, which means daily, weekly, monthly, you're reviewing progress according to those key performance indicators you laid out during your critical thinking process. You should be coming up with measurements. How will we know we're on track? When are we going to look at this again? That's critical thinking, not just here's a solution, go get it done. That's foolishness. Which means we know mistakes are going to be a part of the process. We're not worried about that because mistakes are going to inform us. And since we're regularly reviewing, they're also going to conform us to a much better solution. And if we do that, then we know the harvest will come. But it's only through a patient, thorough, considerate, and logical approach that we'll enjoy a predictable harvest. Otherwise, we're just taking great talent and hoping we win the season. But no good team does that. Any good team, no matter how good their talent is, sits down every week, reviews the tape, and makes a plan for the next week. They're constantly strategically problem solving. Some teams are thinking years in advance of what they're trying to work to. Intuition, efficiency, urgency, all very important today, highly valued. With a strategic problem solving process like this, we're not dispensing with intuition and efficiency or urgency, but we're actually going to combine those with some critical thinking, and then going fast doesn't matter. There's an ancient proverb that says, go fast, but don't hurry. And that's what we're talking about here. You can go as fast as you want, but don't hurry. Don't skip steps. Don't leave the critical thinking behind. Appreciate you guys taking the time for this crash course on strategic problem solving. If you'd like to follow me more, here's some places you can do it. You can schedule a call with me too. Hope this has been helpful. See you guys on the next Quick Learn.